Making a brainless anime is kinda genius. At least that's what I think after seeing the massive popularity of Solo Leveling, which you might think came easy, but it wasn't long ago that the first season fell into obscurity and dozens of anime fans claimed it was a brainless power fantasy. And yet this brainless anime is currently the #1 show on Crunchyroll and the most popular anime of the season, even more popular than Re:Zero Season 3. So if Solo Leveling is such a dumb show, then why is it so popular? In this video, I'd like to analyze the familiar tropes used in Solo Leveling, discuss the common criticisms of the show and its success, and explain why the most brilliant anime used dumb tropes. So first, let's just make sure we're clear on why people like this show, because a lot of anime fans will have you believe that it's overrated. But when Crunchyroll and a bunch of other sites all crash because everyone is trying to watch the new episode at the same time, then clearly there's something about this show that people like. Obviously, one thing that a lot of people like about the show is the animation. People were split on the animation for season 1, but season 2 looks amazing. It's definitely more stylized than the source material, but I actually prefer the anime because this style feels more expressive. But as much as people like the animation, that's only a small part of it. As a power fantasy, Solo Leveling hits just about every mark on the popular anime checklist. It's a fantasy, which is kinda popular in anime. It's a power fantasy, so there's the whole theme of an OP main character that gets to flex on everyone. There's power levels, which if you've ever been on the internet, you know people love to talk about. It's also slightly horny, but I've talked about that in one of my other videos. Point being is it's an intense action series with classic main character harem tropes. So once you see how crazy the fights actually look, it's pretty much a no-brainer why this show is so popular. And yet halfway through season 1, anime fans would have had you believe that the show was doomed. Go on sites like Mal and you'll see reviews like, "This show is brainless, this show has no side characters, this show has no world building, this show is ass." As a matter of fact, by episode 8 or so of season 1, I noticed everyone kinda just stopped talking about the show altogether. I wasn't caught up and didn't finish the season until months later, and by that point nobody was talking about it. At which point I had to go online and ask why everyone was dooming this show when the ending of season 1 was amazing. It was so good it almost had me start a new Skyrim playthrough as some kind of necromancer assassin. Now there are outside factors, the biggest one being that when season 1 dropped, it had to compete for views with Dungeon Meshi and Frieren. But really, a lot of these complaints are pretty absurd in hindsight, because now that season 2 is out, this supposedly doomed show is already a contender for Anime of the Year. Haters will tell you that it's a brainless show with no depth. Funny enough, that's exactly why Solo Leveling is a brilliant show. But real quick, before I say anything else, make sure to become a channel member if you like the video so far. You get custom emojis and badges, and you get to pick which series I cover next. But like I was saying, part of why a lot of people like Solo Leveling is because it's not trying to be deep or intellectual, and that's what makes it a good show. For example, one of the biggest complaints against this show is that Solo Leveling does a poor job of fleshing out its side characters. In other words, it focuses way too much on the main character Jingwoo, and the surrounding characters feel flat and uninteresting. And my response to that is simply, who cares? Part of why Solo Leveling is so fun is because it's a power fantasy. The whole point of this show is to invest in Jingwoo as he grows stronger and beats stronger bosses. And this is enhanced by the surrounding mystery of the quests and the secret player element. True, the whole broken main character shtick is a familiar trope, and one that doesn't have to be very deep to be fun. But the show does such a good job of taking this trope and making it entertaining in this context, that it doesn't have to rely on its side characters. In fact, it lets the side characters be side characters. It would be nice if the side characters could all be the hero of their own story, so to speak, but that's not what this show is about. Even ignoring the fact that a lot of these side characters are actually pretty fun, you don't need to have a complex cast of characters when the show already does such a good job of getting you invested in this one character. Just because the show doesn't fit into your neat little box of what it means to have good writing doesn't mean it's not good writing. writing. And to that point you might say, well, even if the main character is fun, the side characters are still flat and they rely too much on tropes. Which is pretty funny because this argument kind of assumes what it means to be a good character. In other words, unless you're a super fleshed out character with a deep backstory and a dark or psychological philosophy, then you're not a good character. But let's talk about that, because again, just because a character doesn't fit into your little box doesn't mean they're not a good character. For example, you have Jingwoo's sister. She's a regular character in the show. She doesn't have any real quirks or unique personality for that matter. But given her role as a side character, she's a fun part of the story. She teases Jingwoo, the two of them live on their own, so they have a sibling and roommate dynamic. Plus, even if she isn't a complex character, having her present in the story actually builds on Jingwoo's character because it serves as a constant reminder that he's doing all of this to provide for his family, as seen when he steps in at her parent-teacher meeting. Sure, a lot of these characters aren't the most memorable, but you don't have to be iconic to be a good character. As long as you fill your role and do it well enough to better the story as a whole, then that's a good character. It's the same reason there's no objective definition for what makes a good villain. In the case of Solo Leveling, the villains mostly consist of dungeon bosses. In fact, a lot of these bosses don't even talk. So one might point to that and be like, this show has no villains. But just because a villain doesn't have a complex philosophy or doesn't even talk, doesn't mean they're not well written. For example, while a lot of people might say Pain is their favorite villain because he's intellectual, or Itachi is their favorite villain because he's a tragic character that turns out to be a good guy, I actually like Dio more as a villain. Is Dio intellectual? Well, he does have his whole reaching heaven spiel, but I wouldn't exactly call that intellectual. More like lecturing. Now, is Dio a tragic character? Well, he was born to a drunk single father with no money, but he wasn't exactly an innocent schoolboy either. But, you know, that's what I like about Dio. I like that he's no different from any other dastardly villain, and his whole character is about taking over the world just because he wants to. And that's okay, because in JoJo's case, this kind of character is fun to watch. True, TV would be boring if every show had a Dio or a Sauron or a Megatron, and there will always be the sequels or the spin-offs that try to make these kinds of characters down to earth or more complex. But sometimes it's okay for a villain to act like a simple villain, because when you do it right, it's really fun. And that's where Twitter discourse and anime elitism falls short, because everyone online wants everything to be Full Metal Alchemist or Frieren or Look Back. Everyone wants to feel smart by saying that a show is dumb because it doesn't have a nuanced story. But the problem is people like to conflate being complex with being profound, and it just doesn't work. A show doesn't have to be complex or psychological to be well written. It's entertainment. So if you're entertained, then that's good writing. For example, one of the biggest TV shows of this decade is Yellowstone. Easily one of the most influential shows in the industry right now. Personally, I couldn't get past the first episode because I thought it was corny as hell, and funny enough, I thought it relied too much on common tropes. But that was my experience. Clearly, I'm in the minority because half the country is wearing Yellowstone hats and t-shirts. It's the same reason people love the Doom video games. Doom has a decent story, but at no point is it trying to be intellectual. The whole point of those games is to give in to your deepest meat-headed impulses. But people like being meatheads, and they like meathead stuff. The moral of the story is tropes aren't one size fits all. Like stories in general, tropes are subjective in that how good they are depends on each viewer. If you like beefy cowboys that only dress in black, then you'll like Yellowstone. If you like slicing up demons with chainsaws, then you'll like Doom. And if you like anime where the main character flexes on monsters and is completely oblivious when hot girls smell his chest, then you're probably watching Solo Leveling every week like I am. The reason people like dumb tropes is because they're familiar. We know we liked it in one show, so when we see it done well in another show, all our brain synapses fire off and we keep watching because we're like, ooh, look, they're doing the thing. Are these tropes intellectual? Not really. Do they contribute to literary discourse and social commentary? Sometimes. But in Solo Leveling, it's a lot of slicing dudes up, commanding undead armies, and a lot of anime girls. And that's why Solo Leveling is such a great show, because it takes the same dumb tropes tropes that we know we like and tricks us into watching them over and over, all without trying to be smart or intellectual. It's like this quote from the late comedian Norm Macdonald.
Play the dumb guy, you know? Play the everyman.
Nobody wants to feel like an idiot when they're watching a show. This doesn't mean that there isn't a time and place for educational shows or shows that make us question our beliefs, but just because a show is pretentious doesn't mean it's a good show. Golden Kamuy is a historical fiction that has a lot to offer for Western viewers who probably don't know about the history, but it's also full of dick jokes. Gintama makes a regular habit of dropping poop jokes, and yet it's one of the most emotionally mature stories I've ever seen. So really, the key to great writing is to have plenty of simple writing. People like tropes, so just because you don't like a particular trope doesn't mean it's bad writing. And in the case of Solo Leveling, those dumb tropes make it one of the most entertaining shows ever. But now I'd like to hear what you think. How would you describe Solo Leveling? How does it compare to other shows? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And don't forget to become a channel member. You'll get exclusive badges and emojis, you get to pick which series I cover next, and you can even get your name in future videos. Also check out my other Solo Leveling videos, which you can find in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.